Well, a new ProPublica report details the story of a third Texas woman who died after being denied abortion-related care. Today, journalists with ProPublica tell the story of 35-year-old Porsha Ngumezi. She suffered a miscarriage at 11 weeks and went to the ER at Houston Methodist Sugar Land Hospital. She was denied the procedure that would have removed remaining tissue, so she continued to bleed out, dying 3 hours later. Joining us now to talk about this report is ProPublica reporter Lizzie Presser. Lizzie, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You know, tell us a little bit about Porsha's case and what the doctors did do in her situation.
So Porsha was only 11 weeks pregnant, and when she came to the hospital, the ultrasound could not detect a fetal heartbeat or even a fetus. She was passing so much blood that she had passed a lot of tissue already. Because she was passing this much blood, they offered her 2 blood transfusions. And the doctors we spoke to who reviewed Porsha's case said, here's where you know that this patient is at serious risk. She's hemorrhaging. If you are offering a patient blood transfusions, you need to stop the bleeding urgently. The way to do that is a simple procedure called a DNC. You suction out the remaining tissue, the uterus can close, and the bleeding stops. But the doctor did not offer that to her.
Did not even put it on the table for her?
Not immediately. Eventually, he did come in about 7 hours after she arrived, the obstetrician, and said that he would recommend, according to the hospital's routine, misoprostol, which is a drug that you use in inducing labor. It's also part of a 2-pill regimen in medication abortions, and said that if that didn't work, then they would move to a DNC. And again, when we reviewed this with medical experts, they could not understand the reasoning here. The standard of care was clearly a DNC.
So I want to talk to you about something you said there. And you said when we reviewed this with other doctors, the other doctors that you all are talking to, are they here in Texas? You know, in all 3 of these cases that you've reported, you've spoken to other doctors. Are these doctors in other states? Do they include Texas doctors? Talk to me about that.
Yep, we're talking to doctors within Texas, doctors who have recently left Texas, doctors in abortion ban states, doctors in academic centers in California and New York. We're really talking to an array of doctors who have seen an array of experiences. And we're also speaking on the record with doctors in Texas who are able to say to us, hey, we're seeing similar circumstances to a case like Porsha's in our hospitals. We are seeing doctors who are not jumping to DNC when they ought to be, because that's the standard of care. And instead they're delaying it, they're hesitating. And that can lead to these disastrous outcomes like we see here with Porsha.
And again, they're very clear that the reason they're not jumping to it, I'm going to say this, is the consequences that come with the law, right?
I think it's a lot of confusion around the law. This is a very straightforward miscarriage. There was no fetus to save in this case. And so people are starting to equate DNC with abortion. So the procedure itself with abortion. But let's be very clear. You use the same procedure, a DNC, in miscarriage management for a patient who is hemorrhaging like Porsha, as you would in an abortion in the first trimester. So there's no distinction between that procedure. And that's why it's becoming caught up in this confusion of, are we allowed to use this procedure anymore? What does the legwork look like? Who do we have to talk to in the hospital? Can we convince all of our colleagues to bring this patient to an operating room? And some doctors are saying that they're seeing just these very questions stop doctors. And instead, doctors will put a DNC to the end of the line when it should be a first-line treatment.
Have they said why they haven't made these decisions, perhaps made protocol criteria, why they haven't talked to it before a patient would get in? Are they not meeting and saying, here is what our standard policy is going to be?
You know, it's a really good question, and one we are trying diligently to answer. And hospitals have been extremely tight-lipped with us on what their policies are internally. And I don't know what's driving that. I mean, for me, it scares me as a patient, a potential patient, for my friends who want to go to the doctor. How do you know what the policy is at the hospital where you are going to if you are pregnant? And that's a big question. And one thing that we were really interested in seeing with a case like this, because there is so much variation across hospitals in Texas. This isn't something that's happening all across Texas. This is happening in some hospitals. And how are you supposed to know?
Right. And this one was in Houston, but in Sugar Land. So not Houston, if people are not familiar with the geography, so not Houston proper like some of the other cases. These are different hospitals who, again, are not providing this care to women who clearly need it.
That's right. And we were also hearing from women in other parts of Texas, and we include their stories in this piece as well, who had very similar experiences to Portia's, who showed up at the hospital bleeding very heavily, and the doctor would only offer medication. They would not provide a DNC. And in certain circumstances, a DNC is the life-saving care that these women need. So some of those women got lucky. They survived. But as you see in the piece, it's a gamble. You don't know who's going to survive and who's not when you're a doctor making that call.
And
so we chronicle.
I was going to say, the other thing I think is interesting is the OB can, and people may not realize this, your OB doesn't necessarily work at the hospital. So your OB may want to make one call, but the hospital may have a different procedure, which obviously complicates all of this even more. You were able to talk to Porsha's husband. Talk to us about what he had to say about all of this.
I mean, Hope is obviously devastated. Porsha was the love of his life, the mother of his kids. It took him by surprise. When he walked into that hospital, he expected that he was going to get good care for his wife. He expected that this was a routine issue. This is a first trimester miscarriage. About 20% of pregnancies end in first trimester miscarriage. And he trusted the doctors. And so when they told him that what they recommend was misoprostol, he didn't think twice. He said, okay. And it was only after she died that he started to hear from other medical professionals that it made no sense and that what his wife needed was a DNC.
Yeah, it is absolutely heartbreaking. There are lawmakers on the right side of the aisle who would say the law is very clear. The law states if a woman is at risk of losing a major bodily function, or if she is at risk of death, then you are allowed, you are permitted to do an abortion, to give abortion care. Where is the disconnect happening?
Well, I think there are two things here. One is what you can see in a case like Portia's is that her vital signs actually look fine, almost up until the moment in which she goes into cardiac arrest. And it's a case in which you can see that women who come in pregnant and healthy at 35 years old, their bodies are going to compensate for what's going on internally, especially in the case of hemorrhage, until they crash. And that's what happened with Porsha. So there was no way to tell just from her vitals that this was a life-threatening situation. I think the other thing is that after we published our last two stories in Texas, we saw a letter come out from 111 OBs across the state who said the law is not clear. And so if they're saying that to lawmakers, what are lawmakers going to do about it?
Right. There's already been bills filed, but we actually spoke with a lawmaker from our area who is a registered nurse last week. She's not exactly hopeful that something is going to get passed to better clarify this law. The other thing I want to point out is you all are finding out about these stories because people are contacting you, right? What's the tracking looking like?
No, we haven't found any of our stories that way. We are going through medical examiner office by medical examiner office, requesting data. But that tracking is not happening at the state level as far as we're aware. That's happening just by us.
And that I think is what I actually meant to say. It's not like this is being tracked or being reported to the state how many women are dying because they needed abortion care.
It's my understanding that that's correct.
Okay. Lizzie Presser with ProPublica, we thank you so much for taking some time out to talk with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.